So we're back with lesson 6, and we've set things up now on our movies page so that we have the ability to delete. We've also got a functional JavaScript confirmation that if we click cancel, we stop the process, and if we click OK, we get taken to our delete movie page, and we're also passing in the primary key, the movie ID value, so that we can ensure we're only deleting one record. So let's go ahead and build a page with this exact name, delete-movie.php, and then we can write the code to take care of this functionality. One thing I wanted to note, I made a few comments in people's lab 1. Several people had spaces in their file names or folder names. This is never recommended when we're working with web projects. When we have spaces in URL paths, they often get encoded, they get broken. So we should always separate multiple words either with dashes or underscores, but never with spaces. And that goes for both file names and folder names. Okay, so I'm going to use delete-movie instead of delete space movie. Your operating system, it will let you create files and folders with spaces, but never recommended when we're working in web projects. So let's make a new file, which we'll call delete-movie.php. We can put in our HTML boilerplate. We'll put on our body. So oh, sure, Justin. Yep, absolutely. I'll put on a set of PHP tags in the middle. And first, we'll just write a series of comments of what we're going to do on this page. So first, we will get the movie ID TK value from the URL using the get array. So we're passing one variable in our URL called movie ID, but we could pass other ones. So we could append if we wanted multiple variables. It could be, name equals. So this is an array. We only have one variable here. It's called movie ID. So we're going to use that. We will connect to the DB, and we're going to simplify that as well. Moving forward, we will set up the SQL delete command. Execute the deletion. Show message to the user. Okay, so these are all the steps involved. Grab the ID from the URL, connect to our database. We're going to do that a little differently for now. We'll write our SQL command. We'll set up the parameter to pass in the movie ID. We'll run the deletion. We'll disconnect from the database, and we will show the message to the user. So first, we will say if so we're going to use the PHP function isSet, and we're going to check. We're going to check for the URL value in the get array called movie ID. If it is set, we'll put it into a variable. Okay, so if we have a movie ID parameter, we probably also should add another check and make sure that it is also numeric. right? So if I do this, for example, this should throw an error. So I'm going to wrap this inside another. So we want to make sure that there is a value, it's set, and if it is set, that value is numeric. And I'll put in two else statements. So if there is a movie ID, but it's not a number, it's invalid. And also, if we have no movie ID, we also want to show an error message. Okay, so we need to check, do we have a movie ID in the URL? If we don't, we just want to stop everything here. The rest of this code, we can actually move in here, right? We're only going to do all this other stuff if we have a movie ID and it is a number. So I'll just actually cut those comments. And I want them all to go inside these two if statements. Okay, so we don't need to do any of this unless we have a valid movie ID. Now my database connection, I know it's gotten tiresome. We've been adding it to every page, which is cumbersome. It's also cumbersome for me because I don't want to upload my password to GitHub in a public repository. Every time I upload, I have to go into all my pages and take out the password. So we're going to move our database connection into a separate file. So that way we can have it in one file and we can just link it in. So I'm actually going to go, for this part, I'm going to go and make a new file. I'm going to make a new file with a really simple name of db.php. So this will be a shared, I'm going to open a set of PHP tags. This will be our shared DB connection for use on any page. Well, there is no loop here. This is just some logic. We are checking that we have a movie ID. So we only need this code. We're going to write out the code in here, right? We're going to flesh out all this code in a minute. But we only are going to do these things if our two checks for a movie ID are valid. So in this case, for example, this is, we have a movie ID, but it's not a number. And here, movie ID is missing. Okay, so this is the scenario that the movie ID is a number. Right, does that make sense? So inside here we have a number, so we can write all this code. Here we have a movie ID, but it isn't a number, so we're showing an error. And here we don't have a movie ID at all. Yes, we're validating. Exactly. We're validating, we're checking this value. So there are three possibilities here. Number one, we don't have a movie ID at all. So we can't do a deletion in this case because we don't know what movie. So that is this scenario. The second scenario is we have a movie ID, but it is not a number. So something like this. Again, we're checking this scenario. And then the third scenario is, yes, we have a movie ID. Shawshank, we could, but I would suggest it doesn't matter. Because when you run an SQL delete on a record that doesn't exist, nothing happens. So that's okay. So if someone tries to delete movie ID 5 million and we don't have that number, that's fine. No, it won't break. There will be no records affected by the delete. So I don't think we have to validate for that scenario. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go back to my movies page. I'm just going to copy my database connection, my DB variable. I'm just going to copy that whole line and paste it in to my db.php. So now we can share this file with all the other files. So let's say we have to change our password or we move the website to a different server with a different address. We only have to change our database connection in one place. I'm going to add one more line. Which is, if something breaks when we are trying to interact with our database, right now, many of the error messages are not shown to us. By default, the PDO library doesn't show them. So we are going to turn this on by calling the setAttribute method. So we're saying when there is an error, we want this error to print to the screen. We don't just want a blank screen if our database operation fails. We want to see an error message of why it failed. Like we've named the column wrong, or we have the wrong table name, or there's a syntax problem in our SQL. So this is a useful debugging tool. Shawshank, you're right. Because this file is PHP only, there's no HTML here, and we are going to embed it or include it in our other files. The closing tag is optional. By convention, many developers will leave it out. You can put it in if you like. So I'm going to leave it out, but I'm glad you raised that. I did want to point that out, so you were one step ahead of me. Great question. So you can put it in if you want to, but you don't need it. So now on our delete page, instead of me adding this whole line, we can just link to or embed our database file. So we'll no longer have to repeat our connection string over and over again. In fact, I might replace it in some of my other files later to make them simple. Okay, so add your database connection to your db.php. And in my delete movie, I can just use the require. So if we require it, it's just like linking in a style sheet, basically, or a JavaScript file. We now have access to any of the code in the db.php, including our connection variable. So this is just shorter to type. We're less likely to make mistakes. We don't have to remember our password. Much more scalable to have our database connection in one place only and just share it. So we can use require or we can use include. They're similar. We'll talk more about them in a few weeks. Now we can set up our delete, which is delete from, there is no star here. We only use star when we're doing a select query. So we delete from movies where our movie ID equals, and here we will use a movie ID parameter. We don't want to delete all the movies. We only want to delete one. So this where clause is critical. We'll set up our command the same way we've done in all our other files working with the database. We'll prepare our command using our database connection from our database file and our SQL statement here. And of course, we need to bind our parameter. We need to pass in the movie ID from our movie ID variable, which is an integer. So most of this code is fairly similar to what we've done on our other pages. We're just using a different form, different SQL instruction. Instead of a select or an insert, we're doing a delete now. And our delete requires one value, one parameter, which is the primary key of this movie. Down on line 24, this is when we actually remove from the database. And after line 24, that movie should be gone. We will drop our database connection. We no longer need it on this page. Maybe put on a heading here. It says movie deleted. And then we'll give the user a link to return back to the updated movie list. And that movie should have disappeared. So we'll just put on a link that the user can click where they can get back to the movie list, which Sarah recommended we do. This should be everything required on this page. I think we can go and try it out. I'll try and resize my screen so you can see it all in action, and you can see the code if you're still working on it. So I will refresh, and now I can try to delete. So for example, I have this one called not numeric. I'll click delete. I'll click OK. I get an H1, says movie deleted, with a link to go back. And now that movie record is gone from the database. So now I can get rid of these other ones. And I can start removing the data that I no longer need. Now we didn't add any CSS to the delete page. I could also go and grab, if I want, could grab the link to Bootstrap as well as to the Google font that we've got on the movie details. I could include those on our delete page, and then we could also add a little bit of style to it. So I'll maybe do that as well, and then I will put this code up on GitHub in just a minute. Okay, Daniel, if you are getting an undefined variable, you've required your db.php file, and it's called db here. So that variable should get shared between the two files. Are you missing the $sign here, perhaps? Okay. Make sure your db.php, it's in the root folder as well, because we're linking to it here, so this is a relative path. So make sure your db.php is in the root and it can find your file. Shashank, that could be your issue. Okay, so Mina, there's the syntax error. Unexpected token means you're probably missing a bracket or quote. Something's open and not closed. Okay, when you get unexpected, it means either you've missed a semicolon or you've opened a bracket somewhere and not closed it. So it's a bracket or quote or semicolon that's missing. Hamid, that is just a small typo. It is numeric. There is no letter B. Yeah, Tyler had mentioned that as well. So we have the word number with a B, but numeric has no B. It's a bit tricky. So it's, you'll see is numeric. There is no letter B in here. Okay, so Mina, you need to make sure you're checking for your semicolons and check your brackets and quotes, that wherever you've got an open one, something's been opened. And okay, so Tyler, yours. Okay, Tyler, do you have is the proper movie ID being passed? So when you click, do you get a valid movie ID, for example? So you should, first of all, verify the URL, and this is case sensitive. So I've used camel case for the movie ID parameter, right on my link. So in the movies page, right, this parameter I've used camel case. So you also have to use camel case in the delete when we're reading it with the get array. Okay, so yeah, that's the first thing to check, is make sure that the casing, wherever you're using get, is correct, that it's all in camel case. Also make sure that you are calling, you didn't miss the execute method, because this is all our setup, but make sure we've got execute here. The other thing to make sure is that you are filling the movie ID variable. If you miss this step, our movie ID is null, so the code will run, but nothing will get deleted. So those are all the possibilities I can think of immediately as to why you wouldn't get an error, but nothing would get removed. And Tyler M, make sure you're using is set here. Yep. Yeah, so a typo will do it. It can be hard to debug in PHP because in PHP, when you have a typo, like an unrecognized variable, it doesn't give you any warning. Like in a language like C# or Java, if you type a variable name or an object name wrong, then you get an error. The bind line, yes. Right, so we are populating the movie ID parameter in our SQL statement with the movie ID variable that we are filling from the get array. And it's an integer. You have is set.
Rich?
And then it still is showing this one. Just one sec, Shasha.
Yeah.
Tyler, potentially. So make sure on the movies page, again, make sure here that this is camel case, your parameter. Okay, Shashank, you had a question? I will post the code again to GitHub. Shashank,
Yeah,
go ahead.
so far I rechecked everything and all of it is the same. I'm still just getting a blank page when I try to delete it. The movie ID is showing the correct one. All my get methods are case sensitive and correct. There's no typo there. It's connecting
Okay,
to,
so on your delete page, so it never gets to here, right? It's failing somewhere here.
yeah.
Okay. So what I would do, Shashank, because we're not sure where it's failing, here's one little trick. You know, we've got a whole bunch of code, but we're not sure where it's dying. Shashank, here's what I would do if I were you.
Put a print everywhere.
Put in a bunch of echo statements. So I do this, right?
Okay.
If it gets here, I know A worked. If it gets here, like after each line,
Okay, I'll have a look.
right, you'll print them out and then you'll see with this little debugging technique, you'll see how far the code gets and where it's failing. So try that, Shashank, and that will give you a clue as to how far along. Okay, Hamid. Hamid, I'm going to ask you, what does that mean? We did talk about this error message before. Number of bound variables does not match number of tokens, invalid parameter number. Before I explain it, Hamid, I will ask you, because it is a common error. Okay, Daniel, I can look at yours later. So yeah, if it works, so the issue with you is required. So what does that mean? Invalid parameter number, number of variables, and number of tokens do not match. It's a common error. Probably everybody in the class is going to have that same error that Hamid has posted to the chat. What does it actually mean? Okay, Tyler, what was your error?
Rich? Yeah, so I did the echo thing. Hello?
Hello? Sorry, Shashank, I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, I did the echo check and it goes up until it doesn't execute. It stops before executing.
So it goes right up to here?
Yeah, right up to that point and then it stops.
So it's failing when you go to do the execution.
Yeah.
Okay. So Tyler had a typo. Okay, to know. Shashank, off the top of my head, I don't know. I will have to look at it
Okay.
probably and see. Okay. I will post my code to GitHub soon so you can see. Okay, Hamid, what that error means is the number of parameters in your SQL command, which are delimited by a colon with a prefix. It means you have a different number of parameters in your SQL command from the number of bind params commands you are making. So if there's one parameter in the SQL statement, you should have one bind param statement. When there are 4 parameters in your SQL command, 1, 2, 3, 4, you need 4 bind param commands. If you're getting that error, it's saying the number of parameters in your SQL does not match the number of bind param statements. So you'll want to check that section, Hamid. Mina, what was your error? Was it a missing bracket or semicolon or quote? That's something you had opened and not closed? Because that's typically when you get unexpected, that's typically what it means. A bracket or a quote was opened but never closed, or a semicolon is missing at the end of a line. So unexpected means the next code can't run because something was started and never finished. Okay, I will post all this to GitHub very shortly. I'm just going to add Okay, Hamid, I will have to look at it. You can email it to me, perhaps. I'll have to review it. Based on that, if the code's exactly the same, then I'm not quite sure. I'm going to go to my movie details. Right. You missed the colon and a bracket. Yeah, unfortunately, PHP is not very forgiving. So I'm going to go to my movie details. I'm going to grab this stuff. I'm going to grab our CSS and Google font links. I'm going to paste them into the delete file, because then we could also use our delete page, there's not a lot of HTML, but at least we can make it look better. I'm going to copy this entire block from the header on my details page. I'm going to copy that. We'll make a shared header later on, but not today. I'll dump it all in to my delete page. And then we could actually add in, for example, a class. So we'll get that kind of light blue bar. Our back to movie list will be in a light blue bar. So we'll just have a little bit of formatting. So now if I go and try it, our delete page, it should look a little better. It should have our font and CSS. So I still have a few more bad records here. I'll delete. So now we've got our font. I should probably add my Google font and style sheet to our movies page as well. This is still using the default Bootstrap font. We put our Google font on our add and delete pages, our details and delete pages. We don't actually have it here on the main movies page. So I can add my Google font there as well. We've already got Bootstrap, but I'll grab my custom CSS and Google font. If we put these on the movies page, then now our site will look consistent. We're going to have this Google font that we picked in our custom style sheet. Okay, so at least it all looks consistent. Okay, what I'm going to do, before I push this code up to GitHub, I will push it. I want to replace in all of my pages now, wherever we're connecting to the database, I want to replace this with my require command. So all the 5 or 6 pages we've already built before today, our delete movie page, it's just requiring our database. So we don't want to have that connection in all the different pages. So what I'm going to do is go to each of the pages I've already built, like my movies page, and I'm just going to replace my database connection Daniel, I'm going to recommend you don't do this right now until we figure out why your require isn't working. But if your delete is working, then I'm just going to copy it and replace on all my other files. This will make it easier when I upload to GitHub. That way I don't have to change my password in a whole bunch of different pages. I'm just going to go to each of the pages we've built. This is optional. You don't have to do this because if they're already working, you can leave them. But I'm just going to go here and even in our form, in our dropdown, I'm just going to require the database instead. I think that's all the pages. Okay, I will push these changes up to GitHub. And now I just have one file where I have my password, which makes my life a little bit easier. So I'm going to add my files. And push them. So all of the code with the delete, it's now on GitHub if you need to reference it. Okay, so we'll have a break shortly. You'll have a few minutes. You can compare what you have in your application to what I have in GitHub. That will probably help some people fix errors. If you still need help, you can always email me and I can look at it a little bit later. Okay. Try to help as many people as I can during class. Obviously, I can't turn the whole lesson into debug time. I mean, maybe not at this point because we still have some other functionality that we need to cover. So first, I'm going to recommend my code is now on GitHub. So first, check yours against mine first as a starter. Okay. I'll try my best to help debug during class, but we still want to get through edit and update. So we have a couple of options here. We can now add, we can read, we can delete, but we also want the ability to modify or edit an existing movie record. So there's a couple of ways we could do it. We could make the movie titles links where we just click on one, or we can add an edit button. Either one. I think I'll just do it where the titles are clickable. So I want to be able to click on a movie title. This should take us to moviedetails.php. But what should this page look like? So when we click on a movie, it's going to load this page. Should the screen look like this, or should it look different? Bit of an obvious question. What should this page show when the user clicks on an existing movie? Exactly. We want to select it and pre-fill all of these values into the form. So then the user might change things, save them, and we will update the database. That's exactly what we want to do. So first on our movies page, we need to turn these into links. So similar to the way we did the delete links, but we don't need a JavaScript confirmation. That would annoy people. Are you sure you want to edit this movie? We really only need that for delete because edits can be changed, deletions cannot be undone. So in our movies.php, we want to turn the movie titles into links, but instead of going to delete movie, the links are going to go to movie details, but again, we will pass in the movie ID. So when our form loads, we know we can get the ID from the URL and we can pre-populate the form. So we're gonna wrap the movie titles in anchor tags. So we'll add href equals, and then in double quotes, movie-details.php, and our movie ID equals. Then we're going to put on a single quote, then a single quote, double quote. Whoops, sorry. So our syntax is kind of messy. And not quite right. Let's see. Oh, there. So we need to close our quote. I'll put it in the chat. I'll have to test it out. But this should make our movie titles. Oh, and I missed a closing anchor tag. Whoops. Then we have to end the link. Let's try that again. So inside the column, we already had the movie title, but now we're going to wrap it in an anchor tag that links to our movie details and also passes in the primary key. So when we go to the details page, we know which movie we are supposed to retrieve and display in the form. I'll try this out. I'm not totally sure it's right. I think it is. But we'll have to try it. So now when I refresh, yep, so each of these becomes a link. We could style these links if we wanted to. So now when I click, just like our delete links, the primary key value gets included in the address. So each movie I click, we should see a different movie ID in the URL. So our movie details page is done. Sorry, our movies page is done now. We've got edit and delete links beside each movie. They link to the correct pages. They pass in the primary key values, and our delete also includes confirmation. We do not need that confirmation on our movie details. So we're going to need to do some things on our form. And then we're also going to need to make some additions to our save page. Because right now, whenever I fill out the form and click save, this posts to the save movie page, and the save movie page is going to insert a new movie. So that page is going to need to contain some logic. Are we adding a new movie, or are we updating an existing movie? On our form, we're going to need some logic like we had in our delete page. We need to evaluate if we have a movie ID in the URL. If we have no movie ID in the URL, that means the user clicked add a new movie. Notice there's no movie ID, so our form should be blank. We want to show the page just like this. But if the user has chosen an existing movie and we have a movie ID parameter and it's a valid number, we need to, as Mark said, go to the database, fetch this movie out, and then populate the values. Not only do we have to print the text values here, but we also need to select the correct drama in the correct genre in the dropdown. So there's a little bit of logic here as well. So for example, The Godfather is a drama. So when our form loads with movie ID 1000, the title should be here, the rating and year should be here, but the dropdown should change and it should pre-select the correct genre. So we're going to need a little bit of logic there as well. So our movie details page is where we're going to have to do some of this work. And we'll want to do it somewhere before our form starts. We need to check, do we have an ID in the URL? And if we do, we need to print the existing movie values into each of the form inputs. So maybe I'll put it even between my head and body. We're going to put in a section of PHP code. We will check for movie ID in URL. If there is one, fetch selected movie from DB for display. So we're going to need some variables here for the movie title, the rating, the release year, and the genre ID. I'm going to initialize all these variables. We'll also need the movie ID. We're going to initialize all of them to null. Because we might have a movie ID, we're editing. We may have no ID, we're creating a new movie, in which case we don't have any of these values. So I think let's see, it's 9:49. We will take a pause here. I've already basically uploaded everything to GitHub except this check. We'll come back to it. So we will take a break here. If your delete is still not working, again, you can compare what you have with my code on GitHub, see if you can find your error. I need to step away for a few minutes, and then we'll resume. When we come back, we'll write the code that will check for a movie ID. If there is, fetch it, and then display the values in our form. So we're going to make changes to our movie details, and then we'll also need to change our save movie page to check whether we are inserting or updating an existing movie. Okay, we will take a pause here and we will be back in 10.